2004, an ambitious PC game invited players to conquer the ancient world, and conquer the gaming world it did. Rome Total War wasn't just another strategy title, it became a global phenomenon blending nerdy historical detail with epic cinematic battles. Critics have often hailed it as one of the greatest games of all time, and I for one would agree with that wholeheartedly. Over 20 years later, it's still fondly remembered by a devoted community. How did a game about the Roman Republic rise end up ruling the strategy genre? Let's deep dive into this triumph of a game. Innovative gameplay mechanics, marketing, and a rave reception, the enduring influence of Rome Total War is no doubt. So, grab your logica segmentata and let's travel back to the early 2000s when Creative Assembly set out to bring Rome's Legion to life on our screens. And I, as a child, found something that would finally get me out of the real world and into this life of being a lonely nerd that I am so grateful for. Every empire has its humble beginnings, and Rome Total War's origin stories was no different. Creative Assembly had already cut its teeth in the Total War franchise. Shogun Total War came out in 2000, and Medieval Total War in 2002, but Rome was a different beast. Development began in the early 2000s, and the team spent a whopping 4 years building it from the ground up. So why did this game take so long? Well, it's because they weren't just iterating on old tech. No. They were forging a brand new engine to truly capture the grandeur of antiquity. As designer Mike Simpson explained, they moved from 2D sprite-based soldiers to fully 3D modeled troops, so everyone became three-dimensional rather than just the billboard sprites that you saw in Medieval and Shogun. For the first time in the series, your on-screen legionaries and war elephants were actual 3D figures, and you could zoom in on them and watch them getting brutally killed as you've always wanted to as a 10-year-old child. Another huge leap was overhauling the campaign map. You see, Creative Assembly traded the old Risk style of flat map for a new fully 3D campaign map to be realized. A bit more like Civilization, where armies could march freely across terrain. This opened up new strategic depth. You weren't just moving from a province A to B, you were plotting routes through mountains and across rivers. You see, in the other Total War games, you basically would click from one town to another, and your armies would just trot along the predetermined roads, but this time you could actually set up ambushes, maybe even fight in different terrain. It also opened up Pandora's box of technical challenges though. Suddenly the AI had to handle pathfinding on a continuous map, not just hop between preset regions. The AI problem becomes enormous by comparison, programmer James Russell recalled, of that jump into the 3D world. In other words, teaching the computer to think like Julius Caesar was no easy task. The team had to make sure that AI could navigate this new map, hunt down enemy armies, and generally not act like brain-dead barbarians. Did they manage to do this? For 2004, maybe. For 2025, definitely not. Behind the scenes, Creative Assembly as a company was experiencing its own empire building though. At the start of Rome Total War's development, they were partnered with the publisher Activision, but in a plot twist worthy of Roman soap operas, shortly after Rome Total War was completed, the Creative Assembly founder Tim Anstall strolled into the office and announced, "Great news, I've sold you all to Sega." Yes, the studio got acquired by Sega in 2005, right as the game was launching. The developers joked about this new ownership and what it could mean. You know, they're the Sonic the Hedgehog guys, right? How could this work with Creative Assembly? They were known for their strategy expertise, so would they be able to just carry on what they were doing? Well, the acquisition came about because Sega had been impressed by Rome's potential. They even secured the rights from Activision to publish Rome and its predecessors under a new banner. It was an early sign that Rome Total War was poised to be something special, with big players betting on its long-term success. Even before release, insiders knew that there was a hit on their hand. The game was shown off in a playable form at E3 of 2003. I was at the ripe old age of 4 years old, and I remember thinking, boy oh boy oh boy, I wish I'd put stocks in Creative Assembly when I was just a small tadpole. It promptly won Game Critics Award for Best Strategy Game of the Show. Hype was building among both hardcore strategy fans and more casual gamers who were wowed by screenshots of colossal battles, but even bigger publicity boost came from an unlikely source. Well, this was television. You see, Rome Total War came in 2004 of September, but by then many people had gotten the taste of its epic battles without realizing it. There were 2 TV shows that leveraged Rome's battle engine as a simulation tool, effectively turning Rome Total War into an entertainment star before its release. In the UK, the BBC aired Time Commanders in 2003 and 2005, the quirky game show where, well, Richard Hammond would reenact famous historical battles with random strangers. The contestants had no idea that they'd be playing a modified build of Rome Total War. The BBC wasn't allowed to mention the game due to the strict product placement rules, but there it was. Rome's pre-alpha code mode, powering huge battles on national TV in the UK, as bewildered players shouted at screens and exasperated historians provided coloured commentary. Designer Mike Brunton later admitted, "Time Commanders did not use Rome's code pretty much as is, with tweaks for different troop types and camera controls. Imagine tuning into BBC Two and seeing a massive 3D recreation of Hannibal's army at Cannae a year before the game's release. Talk about stealth marketing campaigns." The show couldn't name drop Rome Total War, but Creative Assembly's contribution was acknowledged in the credits, and the developers got valuable feedback watching ordinary people play their unfinished game live. In fact, they even gleaned some ideas and made improvements from that experience. It was a win-win. BBC got cutting-edge visual battles, Creative Assembly got a free testing and buzzworthy showcase of their game's abilities, and us as players got to see Richard Hammond put his head in his hands, as many strangers did not understand why they were being hammer and anvil charged in Rome's campaigns. Not to be outdone though, the History Channel in the US also jumped on this Rome Total War wagon. In mid-2004 they premiered Decisive Battles, a documentary series that used the Rome engine to depict famous engagements like Thermopylae and Marathon in vivid detail. It was an interesting colliding of 3D visuals and of course all done within Rome Total War itself. So by the time that the game actually launched, it had a lot of free advertising. It'd already been getting the recognition far beyond the typical PC gaming crowd. Armchair generals, students and channel surfing dads alike had seen these battles on TV and were itching to play it. So it was always going to be a huge launch. Of course, there was traditional marketing too. Activision ran trailers showing off these giant melees and elephant charges set to rousing music. I mean, I remember the trailer for Rome Total War. It is absolutely incredible. The huge seas, the onagers firing fireballs at the walls and them coming down, the troops and the Gaul guys charging up the ladders. Boy, oh boy, oh boy, was it goddamn impressive. When launch day arrived, the game stormed the market like Caesar crossing the Rubicon. It became the 20th best-selling PC game of 2004 in the US, despite releasing in the final quarter. Impressively, it also stayed in the top 20 for all of 2005 as more and more people started to discover it. Clearly, word of mouth spread that this was the strategy game to get. Reviewers were also just gushing, and gamers who maybe never tried a Total War game before were drawn in by the historical hype. From the outset, Rome Total War was charging forward at full speed, and it was about to show everybody why. Once you installed Rome Total War, things started to show themselves to be quite different. Leaping into the game, you'd find yourselves at the helm of an empire, in a way that no strategy game had accomplished before. The genius of this game was that it used this combination of turn-based grand strategy with real-time tactical battles. Sure, nothing new for the Total War formula, but with 3D graphics, I mean, it was effectively two games in one, and they both fed into each other so perfectly. On the campaign map, you managed politics, economy, and the expansion of your faction. On the battlefield, you perfectly directed tens of thousands of troops in real time. It was the Total War formula that was being established, but Rome elevated it to a new level of polish and scale. I mean, picture this back in 2004, a beautifully rendered 3D map of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, divided into provinces, but no longer in a static risk board. You move your armies along roads and through valleys, maneuvering around neutral factions and rebels. The introduction of this 3D map meant terrain actually mattered in strategy. Mountains slowed you down, forests provided you cover for ambushes, and distance wasn't just counted in abstract terms, but in real miles that your legions had to march. The game started you off in 270 BC as one of the three great Roman houses, the Julii, the Brutii, or the Scipii, each tasked with the Senate for conquering different regions, or as one major barbarian or eastern faction, like Carthage, Gaul, and Egypt. Each faction having its own unit roster, starting position, challenges, and of course stories and characters that you could play. But these characters are so incredibly important. You'd have things like the Senate. They would dole out missions like blockade the port, assassinate a rival, and fulfilling these missions earned you favor, and failing them could get you scolded or even sanctioned. Yeah, this was all part of what the game wanted to do. It was like you were fighting a life or death war, and the Senate would helpfully demand you to send troops to some far-flung corner of the map for some trivial tasks. It was both a flavorful nod to Roman politics and a source of comedic player stories. Eventually, of course, the endgame for any Roman faction was defying the Senate altogether, marching on Rome itself in a grand civil war once you were powerful enough, thus declaring yourself the leader and a new emperor. Few moments in strategy games are as satisfying as that final showdown. Roman legionaries versus Roman legionaries in the streets of the Eternal City, essentially the climactic scene of every sword and sandals epic. On the management side, Rome Total War also introduced family characters with RPG-like traits. You weren't just pushing nameless armies, you had generals and governors, members of your dynasty, who gained traits and retinue over time. They could become brilliant commanders, corrupt governors, or even disastrously insane. Yeah, there are some really funny traits like drunkard or loves gladiators that might pop up, and these all have effects on your characters within the game itself. These little RPG elements made the stories pretty emergent. But let's be honest, as deep as the campaign was, the real showstopper was the battles. When two armies met on the campaign map, the game would zoom into the 3D battlefield representing the local terrain, and you'd fight a real-time engagement with whatever troops were present and whatever troops they were. It had such an incredible variety of ancient unit types, whether you were Roman legionaries, screaming Gallic barbarian warlords, even people that just throw heads at each other, Greek hoplite phalanxes, swift Egyptian chariots, or of course the mighty Carthaginian war elephants. You'd even have cataphracts or siege engines if you wanted. And this was just ancient warfare on a grand scale. Being able to render up to 10,000 individual troops in a battle without the game or your PC collapsing was an astonishing feat, especially for 2004. Seeing two full Roman legions collide with a massive Gallic horde or Persian army complete with elephants was nothing games had experienced before. It genuinely felt like being the general's tent watching history unfold, and well, this is what got people stuck. One of the most exciting gameplay elements though was the siege battles. Previous Total War games had only rudimentary castle assaults, but Rome Total War went all in on siege warfare. When you attacked a city, you construct siege engines, ramps, towers, ladders, then you'd use them in fully fledged city maps. You'd have to breach the walls, either by smashing down gates or walls by sending infantry up these siege towers and ladders to take the ramparts. Siege battles were chaotic and intense. Arrows peppered your troops, narrow streets became killing grounds, and the city layout forced you to adapt your tactics. Capturing the central plaza would win the day, but getting there might mean house-to-house fighting. These sieges gave the game a whole new flavor. One moment you're fighting in open fields, the next you're storming into the mighty city of Carthage itself. The sense of scale being the main selling point for me in these battles. I mean, the tactics, each unit having their own strength and weaknesses, almost like a rock, paper, scissors style of gameplay. Cavalry could crush infantry with a flank charge, but could easily be stopped by a wall of spears. Archers rained death, but would flee if enemy horsemen reached them, and elephants were the ancient tanks. They could trample scores of men and scatter lines until they got frightened or smelled something nasty. And yes, incendiary pigs would be the anti-elephant weapon, making them run amok and absolutely destroy your own men. Tactics come from a lot of stuff. I mean, apparently war elephants really hated the smell of burning bacon, so they put that into the game. I don't know how accurate this research is, but hey ho, that's what Total War did. Unsurprisingly, in the game, the poor pigs though weren't used for anything more than heroic suicide charges. The interplay of units made every battle a small puzzle. How do I use my strengths against the enemy's weaknesses? And the AI, whilst not master of cunning, was competent enough to provide a challenge, especially in large battles where one mistake could send your whole line into a rout. You could also learn to use the terrain, taking a high ground for advantage, hiding units in forests for ambushes, or using choke points to negate enemy numbers. The result? Battles actually felt strategic and spectacular. And on top of that, Total War sprinkled a lot of flavor that made the gameplay memorable. Generals delivering rousing pre-battle speeches. We face adversity, ferocious foes, and if they gain the wrong traits, they wouldn't know how to do a speech at all. When you triumphed, the camera would zoom into the victorious general proclaiming that this was a great day for Rome. If there was defeat, you could hear the despairing cries of your dying soldiers as your screen faced to black. From Roman history and literature adorned the loading screens. This game was made by people that loved the time era, and it was fantastic. It was a game that I played for hours and hours because of these incredible mechanics that haven't left me even to this day, and inspired so many other titles, not just in the Total War franchise even now. Okay, we get it. Everybody loves the game and it has such a close part of everybody's past. But how did it actually do? Well, Rome Total War was met with universal acclaim, the kind of praise usually reserved for conquering heroes returning back to Rome with their triumph. But the game stood proud with 92 out of 100 on Metacritic, indicating near unanimous positive reviews. Critics across the board lauded it as one of the best strategy games ever made. GameSpot gave it a 9.1 out of 10, Editor's Choice Award, praising its big scale and engrossing gameplay. IGN went even further, not only stamping a 9.4 out of 10 Editor's Choice on it, but later ranking Rome Total War as the 4th best PC game of all time in 2005. There were so many people coming in saying that this is the best strategy game ever made. And in short, Rome was a critical darling. The accolades piled up like legionary victories. It nabbed the 2004 Strategy Game of the Year award from the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences. Rome Total War nabbed the 2004 Strategy Game of the Year awards, the DICE Awards, beating out strong competitors in a landmark year for games. It also won countless Game of the Year honors from strategy categories from outlets like PC Gamers and so many more. But more importantly, it sold like hotcakes. We've mentioned the strong chart performance, but let's actually dive into the numbers. In the United States alone, alone, Rome sold 390,000 copies and earned over $16 million by August of 2006. By that time, it was declared the best-selling Total War title in the US. And it wasn't just American success. No. In the UK, the home turf of both me and Creative Assembly, Rome earned the coveted Platinum Sales Award for over 300,000 copies sold in Britain. Germany gobbled up at least 100,000 units in the first few months, and worldwide, Rome Total War easily crossed the 7-figure mark in sales, continuing to move forward for years. In fact, by 2006, the Total War series as a whole had actually passed over 1.3 million copies sold, and that was mostly down to Rome Total War. Creative Assembly wasn't quite sure of what they'd done here. Rome wasn't just a flash in the pan, but a game that kept attracting new players over time. It was the start of the huge shelf life that the Total War games have even now. The game's influence on the strategy genre and its own franchise was profound. After Rome, the idea of blending turn-based grand strategy with real-time battles became the gold standard for any Total War-like games. Other developers surely took note. Of course, you had titles like Star Wars Empire at War and King Arthur, the role-playing war game. These tried to combine the strategic and tactical layers. With Creative Assembly, Rome's success paved the way for even more ambitious projects. The studio, now under Sega, went on to then make Medieval 2, that was built on the same engine, and many other Total War iterations, including forays into the fantasy later on down the line, but it really started with what Rome Total War did. One of the biggest reasons that the game still lives on in the hearts and, hard drives of people today is the community that formed around it. If you ask anybody what is the greatest Total War game, many will say Rome. Of course, Medieval 2 seems to have taken a lot of that crown for many people, but it wouldn't have existed without this first one. Not only is it based on the same engine, but it used many of the same mechanics, things that were started in the 2004 Roman behemoth. In the end, the title Total War proved prophetic. Rome Total War totally won over the world. It left an imprint on strategy gaming that echoes in every massive battle and campaign that we play today. The enduring Monster community passion ensure that this game will stay even years to come. The fact that the Total War series has managed to, get away with so much in recent years, whether it's promising too much, not delivering, overcharging or spending way too much on DLCs or blood packs, they still have a community. And a lot of that is because of Rome Total War.